And welcome to Dartmouth Direct Live. This is our application tips show for the evening. My name is Dan Parish. I'm the Director of Communication and Recruitment in the Admissions Office. I'm joined by Maria Laskaris, who's the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid. Senior Assistant Director of Admissions John Beck is producing the show. He's going to be answering some of your questions in the text chat, and we'll probably have some students in there helping answer questions as well. And we hope that you'll launch your questions into us. We're going to do our best job that we can to try to provide some advice, answer questions, and we'll keep going for a while here. And why don't we just start with some basics, like when's the application deadline, and do you have any sort of advice off the top as we get close to January 1?
Sure. Well, again, as Dan said, I'm Maria Laskaris, Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid, and great to be able to speak with you this evening about our last-minute application tips and questions that you may have. So Dan asked about sort of the deadline and what to do over the next 10 days. And so just a reminder, our deadline is January 1st, so that's 11 days from now. And I think probably the best advice is take a deep breath. You have plenty of time. And really just, hopefully you'll have a break from school. You'll have a little bit of time to really kind of focus on finishing up your essays and making sure that you've collected all the pieces of information about yourself that you'd like to share with us in the application. And then, take some time, write a couple drafts, take another deep breath, take one more look at it, and then just hit submit, and we'll take it from there.
And when you hit submit, it's out of your hands at that point. So, you can return to working hard in school, doing a good job. If you're finishing up your first semester, do a good job finishing up that first semester. And there are some things at that point that'll be beyond your control. So, let those things go. Control the things that you can control. We've got some people already asking questions in the chat, so let's get right to that. Somebody is asking about peer evaluations, how they're submitted. Are they required? Are they a critical piece of the application? So let's just start with yes, we require them. I'm going to give Maria a second here to think about what we're looking for from the peer evaluation, and she'll talk a little bit about that. Students, your peer evaluators, your friends who write those references, can submit them by email if they want to. There's a link on the Dartmouth Admissions website that says Submit Material. We'll probably get that up in the chat for you. The Submit Material link has instructions for peer evaluators on how to submit. They can also mail them to us as well. We may, at some point soon, have a website where your peer evaluator can submit it, but we don't have that today. So if your friend is ready to send the recommendation, have them do it by email or mail, and we'll get it into your file. What do you tell people we're looking for in the peer evaluation?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're going to hear a lot about you from teachers, your guidance counselor. You'll tell us a little bit about yourself through your essays. We'll have a lot of data on you, so your transcript, the courses you've taken, grades, standardized test scores. But I think one of the most important things that we learn from the peer evaluation is what you would be like as a friend, as a classmate, as a teammate, as a member of a group or organization at Dartmouth, and what you would be like as a part of our community, from someone who's close to your own age and who knows you in ways that teachers and guidance counselors probably don't know you. And so it really gives us a sense of your unique qualities and individual quirks and eccentricities that make you the interesting person that you are. And we have, I think, a really good picture of how you might kind of enhance the Dartmouth community by being a member of it. And a great peer recommendation or peer evaluation really brings you to life in ways that I think teachers and counselors, because they don't know you in the same context that a peer will know you. So it's really helpful for us as we try to make the very difficult and nuanced decisions that we need to make.
And I always tell people that we're trying as much as we can to get a well-rounded picture of who you are. So you tell us something, your teachers tell us something, right. Your friends come at this from a different perspective. Somebody asked about the alumni interview, and I would add that to our well-rounded picture of who you are. It's another chance to get a different perspective on you. This is a person who probably doesn't know you the way a friend does, and has just a short window into what you might bring to your college experience. We've got a question about whether students need to contact us to request an interview. You don't. And here's the way this will work. We'll distribute names out to alumni around the country and around the world in different places. In many places, alumni will contact students for an interview and set that up sometime between now and the second week of February. But we need to let you know that there are places where we don't offer interviews, particularly abroad. There are some places we're not able to offer interviews. So if you're not contacted for an interview, it's not a bad sign. It doesn't reflect on the chances for your application. We rely on volunteers to conduct interviews, and we know that we might not be able to offer interviews to everybody in the applicant pool. So if you live in an area where we have alumni doing interviews, they will reach out to you. And again, if you think about all the different pieces in your application, you've got teacher recommendations, guidance counselor recommendation, you've got your part of the application, the peer. The idea here is to put together different perspectives, and that interview can be one of those perspectives that helps out. Oh, just one more note on the peer rec. Somebody asked if it should be typed because it's a downloadable PDF. It's sometimes hard to fill out. Here's the thing. It should be easy for us to digest and read. Right. So if your friend has wonderful, clear handwriting and they want to go old school and submit it in writing, that's fine as long as we can read it. We'll take it in whatever form it comes to us.
Exactly.
Should students attach a resume to the Common App? What do you tell people about that?
Yeah, well, it's a judgment call. The Common App certainly provides, I think, ample space to identify the major extracurricular activities or part-time jobs or things that you're doing outside of the classroom. There may be occasions, though, where you feel like you need a little more space to perhaps fully flesh something out. I guess I would just caution students to really think about that fine balance between just enough information and too much information. We do have a lot of information on all the candidates who apply to Dartmouth, and I think it's your job as you're preparing your application to really help us focus on what's most important. So if you're thinking about an additional resume or some additional statement to kind of help us understand why something's been so important to you, the more you can do to be very concise and succinct, and again, really focus our attention. So whether it's all the work that you're doing, let's say with community service, or maybe a part-time job, or maybe you're really active in your church or youth group or synagogue or arts activities, rather than many pages about that, if you can really kind of, again, focus it for us so we can say, got it, this is exactly what we need to know about why these activities have been important to you, and also why perhaps they don't fit in the spaces the Common App has allotted. So that's what I tell students, but I think it's really a judgment call for you as you think about what is it that's most important that you would like us to know.
Yeah. We've got a question from Stevie asking, is it better to apply as an undecided student or to a specific major, even if you'll probably change the major? And this is one of the pieces that might be a little different about Dartmouth compared to other schools to which you're applying. When you apply to Dartmouth, you're applying to Dartmouth. And in most cases, we're not really paying much attention to your expressed interest in a particular major. And I'll explain, there may be some cases where we do, but we're not admitting you into a major. We're admitting you to Dartmouth based on the idea that you're a student who will thrive here, a student who will contribute to the community, a student who intellectually is a good fit for Dartmouth, and who will be able to find the interests that match well and allow them to thrive. So you don't need to worry about us slotting you into a major when we make decisions, and it won't make your path more difficult to apply undecided or to apply to a particular major. Even engineering, we don't admit students into the engineering school at Dartmouth. Engineering majors apply to Dartmouth, they're admitted, and they make that decision once they're here. The students for whom the choice of major might have an impact is where your choice of major is a major piece of your candidacy. You really want to major in engineering, but math is a liability for you. That's probably something we would notice. You are passionate about classics. You've been passionate about classics since 7th grade. It takes over your application. We're going to notice that. But if you happen to check off engineering, environmental studies, and English as 3 potential majors, we're going to think about you as a student at Dartmouth and not worry about what you checked off as your potential major. Marissa's asking, is there a status check for our Dartmouth application to make sure that our scores and transcripts were received? Do you want to talk a little bit about online applicant services and when we tell people what and how that's going to work?
Exactly. So as soon as we receive your portion of the Common Application. And bear in mind, in the next 10 days, we're going to be receiving a lot of Common Applications. The Dartmouth does close for the holidays from the end of this week through the beginning of the new year, although we will have staff working in the admissions office, downloading materials from the Common Application, processing mail that arrives kind of old school, the old-fashioned way, to our doorstep. So it will take us a little bit of time because a huge portion of our applicants do submit their materials, and most of the secondary school information arrives around the deadline. But just as quickly as we can, we will confirm for you that we have received your portion of the Common Application, and in that confirmation email you will receive instructions as well as a login and PIN where you can go online to our online applicant services section of our website, and then you can check to see when materials have been received. But I do just ask for a little bit of patience. It does take us 2 to 3 weeks once we return in January to really work through the backlog of information that comes in around the deadline. It's totally fine that it's coming then. We know it. We're prepared for it. We're ready to process it all. So, but just it does take us a couple of weeks at least to get through the material that's waiting for us when we return from the holiday break.
Right. So what you will see at first after you get that acknowledgement in the online applicant services page is just an announcement that says we're processing materials. Here's some places you can find information, and when we're ready, when we know that we've done the best job we can to process as much as we have, late January or so, we'll send a notice out to all applicants that says, okay, now you can check your status to see if there's anything that has left your application incomplete. So really rely on that. It'll take a little bit of time, and in the meantime, we're good at this. We track lots of material, and we're able to keep track of that and keep a hold on that. Bobo is asking what it means when we defer an early decision applicant, and so just a brief picture of what that looks like. You should know a couple of things for early decision applicants who are deferred to regular decision, a couple of things just about how the process works. At the end of early decision, we deny the candidacies of more students than we defer. So there's a group of students who at the end of early decision found out that their candidacy won't be continued. But we still have a lot of students who are deferred. As we go into the regular decision application process, we expect that among the deferred students, the process will be very similar to what it is for regular decision students. We'll let their applications sit for a while we're going through the first review of regular decision applications. We'll get mid-year reports. We'll collect new material. And as we get into February and our second reviewing regular decision applications, that's when we'll look at deferred early decision students. And the process at that point is very similar to what it is for regular decision students. So the chances are similar. So Bobo had asked whether there's no chance or a semi-chance. You still have a chance of being admitted and being reviewed carefully, but you also have to be realistic and say, okay, Dartmouth is really highly selective. It's hard to be admitted. I need to get my other applications out the door. I need to do a good job on that. And frankly, I need to consider what these other options are because I know that it's hard to get into Dartmouth. That's why it's called highly selective, and move forward with in that way. So does requesting financial aid as an international student affect our chances of admission? That's an easy, short answer question.
No. We're really fortunate at Dartmouth. We have significant financial aid resources. We're fully need blind in our admissions process for all applicants, whether they're U.S. citizens, permanent residents, or international students. And that's something that we are so thankful for, to have here at Dartmouth, that commitment to affordability and accessibility, and to admitting students based on their ability and their accomplishments rather than their family's ability to pay for the education. Maybe it's a good point also here to just pause and say that, to remind folks that all of our financial aid that we offer at Dartmouth is based on your family's demonstrated need, but also very, very importantly, we guarantee that we will meet 100% of your family's need for all 4 years. So for us, financial aid is a critical part of our commitment to ensuring access and affordability to students from around the country and around the world. And so it's really, I think we're very excited to be able to say that being an international student in no way, your chances are not negatively impacted if you're applying for aid.
Right. We've got a couple of questions coming in from PKN and ARC0928, a couple of questions about credentials and about materials that will come in and whether they'll be important. The last few days on the Dartmouth Direct Facebook page, we've had a bunch of questions about testing. So just to make it clear, Dartmouth requires the SAT reasoning test, the big SAT, or the ACT with writing. So you can submit the SAT or the ACT, and we'll swap out one for the other. And then all students should at some point submit two SAT subject tests. And if you haven't taken the subject tests by this point, We will accept the tests from the January date. We can also review your application without the subject tests if you don't have them. We'll make an admissions decision, and then before you enroll at Dartmouth next fall, you'll receive notices about completing those tests in the spring. But really the required pieces are SAT or ACT with writing, and then subject tests are a second piece, and there's been some confusion about that. And then there was a question about senior grades, and we will receive those as we're reviewing. So I do want to talk about, as we go from first reviewing applications in the first review where we might not have senior grades, what happens after the first review before the second review, and we pick up information?
Yeah, well, our process is one where we are constantly updating your applications with new information. As we receive, again, whether it's the mid-year grades or maybe you have some late testing that you're sending to us, or the recommendations as they come into our office are being added to your application. So after we've had a chance to do the first review on every application, we will then have a period of time where new information is collected. And primarily for most students, this would be their mid-year grades and or an alumni interview. Those things tend to come a little bit later in the process. Most of the recommendations, the evaluations, certainly your part of the application, tend to arrive on or about our deadline. So again, it takes us a little while to process everything, but as we move to our second review stage or part of the review process, we typically are waiting to begin that process until we have the grades from your first semester or end of the first or second trimester, depending on how your school calendar is set up, and then hopefully an interview as well.
Right. Monica's asking if you can send in additional letters of recommendation, and the short answer is yes, you can. But we also want to provide some caution to that and talk a little bit about the role that those letters might play. So the required recommendations are the guidance counselor recommendation or counselor recommendation that goes with your school report, 2 teacher recommendations, and then that peer evaluation. Any additional recommendation, you should set a pretty high bar for that. And you should really think about, is this a recommendation that will add a new perspective? Is the recommender somebody who knows me well in a setting that's maybe different than my high school teachers? So the idea here is that this is a person who knows me really well, who's going to talk about me in a setting that's really important, and is going to bring me to life in a way that's a little different than what the admissions committee is already hearing. Just piling more additional teacher recommendations in your application doesn't make sense. And asking for a recommendation from somebody whom you perceive to be a very important person, but doesn't know you well, that's not a great idea. But your rabbi or clergy person, the scoutmaster you've known for 5 years and worked very closely with, an employer who's seen you in the workplace and really knows you well, that's a perfectly appropriate extra recommendation. And 1 is probably a pretty good number.
Just like with the resumes, focus. Help us focus on what's most important.
Tess is asking a question we get a lot. Is there any way to distinguish your application as a student who really wants to attend Dartmouth? How do you express that interest? What do you tell people in response to that?
Well, it's interesting. We do get asked that question quite a bit. We don't have a why Dartmouth kind of essay or supplemental essay on our application. To be honest, I think that if you're in our applicant pool, you have an interest in Dartmouth, and if we admit you, you better believe we're going to do a lot to convince you that Dartmouth is the school for you. If there are things that you would like to share with us, however, the common application does have space for additional information. You could also choose to make that, if you ask a peer or if it comes up in your alumni interview, you could use some of those avenues to, if you want to, convey your interest in Dartmouth in that fashion. But I think in our process, we're not driven by yield in terms of really thinking about, we only want to admit students who've already decided Dartmouth is their clear first choice. We have a small early decision process that allows us to do some of that, but we know that the vast majority of our applicants and our class will come through the regular decision process. And so if we think you're the kind of student that we'd love to see at Dartmouth, we'll do our best to convince you of that. So we're excited that you're in our applicant pool. And there certainly are opportunities. If you'd like to send an additional note with your application to let us know, we'll certainly include it. But it's really not something that we are asking students to do at this point. Right.
I can't even pronounce this username. Gecko. All right. Is asking about submitting supplemental materials for either a fine arts review, and I'll add into that solo vocal or instrumental performance. Right. And so the simple question is, what weight is that given? And then I can talk a little bit about the details of how those submissions work. But you want to talk a little bit about a portfolio or performance. Sure. What does that add to somebody's candidacy?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a way for us to really appreciate the depth of your accomplishment in a particular visual or performing arts. We have colleagues on the Dartmouth faculty in music, studio art, film and television studies, dance, who have agreed to help review these materials for us. And so we will actually give your materials to them, and they will have a chance to look at them and then send us back an evaluation and a sense of how well they think you would do at Dartmouth, whether you decide to pursue the arts as an academic discipline or as a co-curricular activity. Again, I think, like with other parts of the application, we're looking for students who have made a real commitment and have really given of their time and energy to these activities. And I think particularly if you're going to go through the trouble of putting a portfolio together or putting together, an MP3 or a CD or some a music supplement or dance supplement, I think our faculty are really excited to take a look at that. But I would ask that this be something that you see as a clear academic or extracurricular passion. So something that you do want to continue while you're here, because I think we definitely are looking to create a community at Dartmouth that is very vibrant, that is very diverse in its interests and talents and experiences, and we know that students learn tremendous amounts from each other. And so the presence of students with real passions, again, whether it's in the arts or the out of doors or anything, I think really makes this an interesting place. So we're excited to see that, but again, ask that if it's sort of a passing interest, or you're thinking maybe this will be the one thing that gets me in, but I don't really want to continue in that vein when I get to Dartmouth, I'd suggest that maybe you don't need to send that. But if it's something that you're really thinking is a pursuit that you'd like to continue, then we'd love to see that.
Right. And you don't need to be planning to major or minor in that area. But this is something you've poured a lot into in your high school experience, and in some ways it helps us understand what shape that's taken on the other side. And so as you come to us, you may decide that it's not an academic pursuit, but you want to participate in the Dartmouth Symphony Orchestra or the Barbary Coast Jazz Ensemble, and great. You don't have to be a major or minor to do those things. There is a link again on our website, the Submit Materials link, and I think it's been posted on the text chat, or it will be, where you can learn about how Dartmouth faculty members want to receive those materials. And it's important to pay attention to that, because our departments, some of them mirror what the Common Application Arts Supplement says, and some don't. So pay attention to that website if you want those materials to be reviewed, because it has to come in the form they ask for it. Charles is asking whether you can send other supplemental materials in, and so we'll receive a lot of material, newspaper articles that showcase things that people have done, other kinds of things like that. And so it goes back to what Maria said earlier about being concise. We don't want to sound as if we're not flexible, but if we have to, if we're reviewing somewhere north of 24,000 applications, we need to make sure that the material that comes in is pertinent to your candidacy. And so supplemental materials beyond those portfolios or performance tapes that are being evaluated should be concise. They work best usually when they're attached as part of the Common Application, and you do have the ability to do that through Common App Online now, so you can include things like a concise resume, a reproduced newspaper article or something like that. If you've done a research project, a significant research project, you can submit an abstract attached to your Common Application. Don't submit the entire research project. We won't be able to digest that. But a piece that's concise and highlights something that's related to an interest, as Maria said, that you're going to carry on into your college career can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And can help us understand how you're going to pursue that when you're here.
Right.
Yeah. All right, let's see what else we have. Does Dartmouth have a quota to fill for the number of students from each state? Go ahead.
No. That's another ezy one. We travel nationally, we travel internationally. We're here chatting with you, and you are all around the country and all around the world. Our job is to admit the students that we feel from the applicants that we receive this year. are the ones that we think will contribute in unique and interesting ways to the Dartmouth community, both in the classroom and out of the classroom, and regardless of which states they're coming from. Now, our pool is, because it is a national pool, we do see students from every state, but we are not looking to make sure. Most years we get pretty close to all 50 states, but it's not something that if we don't get all 50 states, that's okay. I think we are looking for the students that we feel have really distinguished themselves in the context of the applicant pool that we're looking at that year, regardless of where they're coming from.
And again, that's a piece that might be a little different about Dartmouth, or Dartmouth and some of our closest peers. The applicant pool is geographically diverse, so we don't have to worry too much about dumping students into categories or by zip code and saying, oh, we're only going to take this number of students from this area. We have a lot more flexibility to think about a student's perspective and to say, wow, this is somebody who's really got a different view of things. And whether they live in a zip code that starts with 01 or 02 something or 92 something, or they are outside of the country, we've got a little more flexibility to not worry about that. And some years we're going to have students from 50 states. Some years we're only going to have students from 48 states, and that's going to be okay. Yeah. We're also lucky there's a question from Karina about whether we take only a certain number of students from each school. And again, the size of our applicant pool means that we have a little more flexibility than a lot of places do, to be able to not worry about capping the number we take from certain schools. And I'll tell you, we've got schools in the applicant pool that have one student applying, and we have schools in the applicant pool that have 60, 70, 80 students applying, and it wouldn't serve us well if we came to the 11th student in a school and said, oh, we're not going to take this one, even though they're a great person. So because of the size of Dartmouth's applicant pool, we don't have to worry too much about managing a school group and keeping it small, because that'll work itself out. We've got some flexibility and don't really have to worry about putting people into categories, and instead can think a little bit more about your talent, your perspective, and where that really comes from. And maybe it comes from where you live, but it might come from something else. Right. Yeah. So Shabaya asks a question that we always get, and do SAT scores weigh a lot? We're getting lots of questions about testing. What's the role? I know that some folks in the chat have been putting up links to just the requirements and all of that, but we just put testing into context. We talked about getting lots of different perspectives. We never talked about testing, so where does that fit?
Yeah, well, we are going to collect a lot of information about you, and some of it, again, is very qualitative. So recommendations, interviews, the peer evaluation, your own essays, your own words. I mean, that's very qualitative, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at that and trying to read it, understand it, and get a really good picture of you. We also have parts of the application that are very quantitative. So transcript and test scores are two great examples. Specific to test scores, it's really one of sort of 7 or 8 pieces of your application that we're looking to assemble. And our job is to look at the entire application. So we talk about holistic admissions. As Dan said, it's a holistic admissions process. We're thinking about you as a whole person. So test scores are not more important than your transcript. They're not more important than your essay, your recommendations, your peer evaluation. It's how the whole picture comes together for us. And so obviously, because we ask for testing, we do think it's an important part of the process, but it's not a driver of our decisions. There are no scores above which a student is sort of automatically admitted or below which a student is automatically not considered. We will evaluate every single application that we receive, and we approach it in a way that says, first of all, who is the student? Let me understand a little bit about home community, school community. So we call this context, really understanding who you are, what kind of school you're applying from, what kinds of opportunities and resources you've had available to you within your secondary school, your home environment. And then we see how all the pieces fit together. And we think about you, again, as an individual, not as a test score, not as a grade point average, not as a list of activities, but it's how all these things come together. And for every applicant, that balance or that picture that comes together will be a little bit different because your strengths will be different from the next applicant's strengths. And so we want a process that is flexible enough to really appreciate how we differ from one another, and that also recognizes accomplishment and potential beyond just what a test score might tell us.
Right. And that process that Maria just described, I mentioned earlier that we're really lucky that we have a geographically very diverse applicant pool. And we're getting a lot of really good questions about race and ethnicity. And there have been some really good articles in the press lately about this. Some are accurate and some are not. And so, I'll go back to what I said about geography. In thinking about race and ethnicity, we're really lucky that the applicant pool is internationally diverse. It's geographically diverse within the United States, and we're pulling students from a lot of different directions. Students who self-identify around race and ethnicity in a lot of different ways. Students whose interests are really mixed up, and that's part of being a highly selective, nationally known, internationally known institution. So that gives us a little flexibility in the selection process, not to have to put people into categories. So students don't usually believe me when I tell them this, but we don't shake the applicant pool out before we start reading. We're lucky enough to not have to kind of put students into geographic boxes or separate students out by testing. We don't kind of do that before we start reading. We don't separate you out by race and ethnicity before we start reading. So when we get into the reading process, we open up your part of the application first and start thinking about, what do you do beyond the classroom? What opportunities have you had, and what obligations do you have, and how have you taken advantage of those? How, have any of those rubbed off on you? And the truth is, if you live in the United States and probably in other parts of the world, your race, your self-identification around race and ethnicity may have a real impact on how other people interact with you, may have a real impact on how you interact with other people, and that's what we start to try to get at, to try to understand the lens that you're going to bring to Dartmouth. And again, if you think about the geography question around this, do we limit numbers we take from certain areas? We're trying to think about perspective, added perspective to campus. And there are times when your cultural values, your self-identified race, religion, where you live may have a really big imprint on what you bring to your college campus. You're really proud of being from South Texas. That's a big part of who you are. And then there are other cases where it may not. You may not talk a lot about that, but what makes you who you are is that you're an artist, you're a dancer, you're a really good runner, you're I don't know, whatever, you edit the newspaper and you do it better than anyone else. So it's trying to grab onto that perspective. What will you bring? And so it would be naive, it would be dishonest to say that race and ethnicity don't play a role in college admissions. They play a role, but it's not the box that's checked as much as us trying to understand perspective that people bring. And again, that might be a little different at Dartmouth and at some of our peers in other places because our applicant pool is a little different. It's bigger, it's pretty diverse, it's pretty eclectic, it's hard to categorize.
Right, and we spend a lot of time reading the materials that you send and really understanding you as an individual. I often think about it as it's an individualized review process, and we want to understand who you are as a unique individual and the things that matter to you, the influences that have shaped you into the person that you are, your hopes, your aspirations, and that's going to be different for every single person. And we have, as Dan said, we're fortunate that we're able to spend the time to do that, and we think we make better decisions because we take the time to get to know you as a person beyond just test scores and rank and grade point average, but all the things that go into making you who you are important to us.
Great. All right, some more good questions just about kind of specific pieces of the application. All right, I'm in a specific academy within my high school that has uncommon classes and coursework. Should I send in a detailed description of the academy? Should I trust that my school report will suffice? This probably also goes for students who are in magnet programs, specialized schools. What should they do?
Usually your high school's school report or school profile does, I think, a really good job of explaining to us if your school is offering any of these sort of special academies or magnet programs or schools within a school. But I think, I would say as a first step, take a look, ask your guidance counselor or principal if you could just see a copy of the profile. Hopefully it's something they share with students and parents, but I think that's a good first place to look. And if you feel like the profile does a good job of explaining, which I think in most cases, I think that they actually do a really good job of explaining these unique features of secondary schools to us, then I think it's probably plenty of information for us. And it may also be something you decide to address in one of your maybe in your main essay for the common application, if you have a really unique educational opportunity that you've taken advantage of within your school and why that's been important to you. I mean, that could be a really terrific essay topic, or maybe it's something that comes up, again, in your letters of recommendation, if your counselors or particularly teachers who are part of this program can give us some sense of, why this program exists and why you've chosen to be a part of it and what you've contributed to that program. So there are a lot of ways we can know about these unique features of secondary schools, but certainly my first suggestion would be just take a look at your school's profile, and usually I think it's pretty well articulated for us so that we can understand fairly quickly the unique feature of your secondary school.
And that goes for grading systems that are a little different and things like that. Most schools are really good at describing to colleges what we need to know so that we can evaluate your transcript. Because again, it goes back to what Maria said about how we make admissions decisions. It's not a formulaic process. We know that for every high school that we get from which students apply, there'll be something different about the last high school. And so as we get to your school report, we look for those cues from the guidance counselor. There are easy ways for counselors to express that in the school report. If you're applying from an international school, there are easy ways in the international supplement. And then most schools have a profile that just lays it out and says, here's how the grading works. Oh, by the way, we have this magnet program within the school or a special academy, and they do a good job explaining that. L. Smith's asking about whether a high class rank would make up for a low GPA.
Depends how low.
Yeah, but I think that the short answer would be yes, because we're thinking about the context of your grades. So if you attend a school where grading, there's not a lot of grade inflation, and you're in the top handful of students in the class, but being in the top handful of students in your class means that students have A's and B's, a mix of A's and B's, because those are the highest grades offered in the school. Then we understand the context for your grades. And there may be another school where having all A's or a mix of A's and B's doesn't put you towards the top of the class. So we'll get those cues from the profile. We'll understand how to better understand your grades by looking at the kinds of courses offered, the details and information in the profile. So that'll help us get a good sense of that. Does Dartmouth opt out of seeing self-reported test scores on the Common Application? We don't, do we?
No, I think if you, we have score choice. So you choose which scores you would like to be submitted to Dartmouth from the College Board or the ACT. And I believe on the Common App, you choose which scores that you want to self-report. And so if you only give us your 3 best, your SAT, critical reading, math, and writing from different test administrations, sort of mimicking what you would send through score choice, that's all we'll see. So it's really up to you. If you provide the scores on Common App, if you self-report, we will see them. But for us, we also ask that all scores are reported officially through the College Board or the ACT, and then if you use the score choice option, that's all that we'll see. Yeah.
And the one thing I'll say about that score section on the Common Application, if you haven't already submitted your part of the Common Application, if you have future test dates, you took tests in December, but those scores haven't been sent yet, or you're going to take tests in January, it can be helpful to list those test dates, because then we'll have a cue for looking out for that information to come later. If you've already submitted your application, it's not a big deal. I mean, we're gonna get those scores and process them, but knowing that there's more testing to come can be helpful. It's not critical, but it can be helpful. So let's talk a little bit about we're getting close to the end time. We may be able to answer a few more questions, but before we get to that point, just to talk about what happens from here on out. So January 1st is our application deadline. We know that you're going to do a good job submitting your materials. We know that there are some things out of your control. So if you learn that your secondary school report came to us a few days late, don't worry. We're going to handle that.
Okay.
If you learned that one of your teachers left on vacation and forgot to hit submit on the Common App or something, it's okay. The more materials that get to us earlier, the better, but don't worry if something's a few hours late. We're going to be reviewing applications in January, February, and March. Decision date will be in late March. March 29th or 30th or somewhere around there.
We'll put it on our website, don't worry.
Yeah. And what else? What other details should we cover as we're kind of wrapping up?
We will spend it will be about 3 months, really just devoting our full attention and energy to the application review process. It's really the heart of what we do. I think we are very excited to see who is interested in attending Dartmouth. We will have another video chat for folks in early January on January 5th at 8 p.m. So that will be something to look forward to. I think a lot of people will also have questions about the financial aid process. Our financial aid deadline is the 1st of February. So we will also have information up on our website about financial aid. And I think for me, the most important thing that we want to convey is over the course of the next 2 to 3 months, if you have questions about the process, about your materials that you're submitting, feel free to reach out to us through the Facebook, through email, be in touch with our office via phone, and we'll do what we can to answer your questions. But really appreciate that you are interested in Dartmouth and that you're submitting an application.
Yeah. Dartmouth Direct on Facebook is a great way to get your questions answered. I should give you just a warning, we may be slower to respond between now and January 3rd or 4th. We're going to have a lot of Dartmouth students back here in January, and we'll have folks on there answering questions. And then as you are learning more about Dartmouth, the Dartmouth Admissions website can be a really good practical place to get information, submit materials, ask questions on there about the admissions process. And then Dartmouth Direct is our website where you can really just access student-generated content. And this broadcast comes out through Dartmouth Direct, but blogs and other information that we'll post up there. So use those resources. There's a lot of you can connect directly with Dartmouth students in a lot of ways and get good, honest answers from them about what it's like to be a student here. So take advantage of that. All right.
Great.
I think we're all set. Good luck with the application process. Thank you for joining us and for all of your questions. And we look forward to reading your applications over the next few months. Thanks again.
Thank you.